Once upon a night, brothers Angus and Malcolm Young were jamming in the studio after hours, when suddenly Angus had a brilliant idea for a riff that he immediately played. That riff galvanized brother Malcolm, who promptly jumped onto the drums to add a beat. It changed everything. The story of a life-changing hard rock riff and the sessions that followed, including firing a legendary producer for an up-and-coming producer. That producer would help to take AC/DC to global domination. The story is next on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you've ever wondered where a certain song came from, the stories behind your favorite songs, you're going to be right at home with this channel. Make sure to subscribe below so that you never miss out on our daily content. I mean, we get the stories of these songs straight from the artists. We also have a Patreon. You can take a look at the link below where you can get more content, and we reward you with that. And that helps our mission of curating music history. It's so important. You know, in the grand scheme of things, bands come and go. I mean, one day they're on top. Maybe the next day they could be dropped by their label. But when the dust settles, and 40 or 50 years go by, we get to see who the real titans of music are. You know, who has and will stand the test of time beyond the flavor of the week or even a few big albums. With that in mind, there is no question that AC/DC has endured as much as any band in music history. Metallica, U2, Guns N' Roses, Aerosmith, Journey, Fleetwood Mac, even the Rolling Stones, they all stand behind AC/DC in terms of record sales in the US. AC/DC is essentially tied with Pink Floyd. Only the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and the Eagles are ahead in terms of rock groups. Now, worldwide, AC/DC is in the top 20. That's when you consider all artists, all genres. Now, when you take into account the biggest selling albums of all time, AC/DC, Back in Black, is the third best-selling album ever. It's just behind Michael Jackson, Thriller, and Pink Floyd, Dark Side of the Moon. Again, I said globally. I always say that if an alien from another planet wanted to know what rock and roll is, I'd just play him AC/DC, maybe Van Halen. That takes me to the subject of today's video. If you had to define AC/DC by one song, I mean, if you had to dial it down to just one riff that captures their essence, what would it be? Let us know in the comments. But the riff for me that led to Back in Black, you know, that epitomizes their sound, that took them to the masses and influenced so many who came after, you'd be hard-pressed to find something better than Highway to Hell. This riff is seismic. It's absolutely galactic. When the band started working on the sessions for Highway to Hell, their last album with the legendary frontman Bon Scott, they had released 5 albums globally with really no support from radio in America. They had designs, of course, on making it in the States. They were coming off of the live album If You Want Blood, and their last studio album before that was Powerage from 1977, which built upon their hard rock bluesy sound, of course. They were ready for their close-up. Up to that point, their albums had been produced by brother George Young and Harry Vanda, who were name-checked, we just talked about this, in Dire Straits' song Sultans of Swing. George and Harry had produced everything from High Voltage on up. Well, the band's label, Atlantic Records, who had rejected their 1976 album, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, they were of the belief that AC/DC was ready to blow up in America, but they felt that the band needed a different producer at the helm. The band members were against this, out of loyalty to their brother, of course, and friend. They felt disrespected, and they felt that older brother George Young wasn't given proper credit. They felt that George was like a 6th member of the band, really. They're pretty much forced to work with an outside producer, though they didn't really have a choice. So Atlantic matched him up with legendary producer Eddie Kramer. Now, Eddie had guided Jimi Hendrix, Kiss, and Led Zeppelin. Seemed like an inspired pairing, except that it wasn't. When Eddie Kramer met the band at Criteria Studio in Florida, they kind of mixed like oil and water. First of all, they didn't want to go to Florida. But as some of the band members would later relate, Eddie Kramer actually looked at lead singer Bon Scott, and he said to the band, "Can your guys sing?" That's exactly what he said. As rhythm guitarist Malcolm Young would say, and I quote, "Eddie Kramer was a bit of a prat. He might have sat behind the knobs for Hendrix, but he's certainly not Hendrix. I can tell you that much." End of quote. Eddie Kramer really didn't get what AC/DC was about. Word is that he was considering having the band record a cover song. Spencer Davis' song, "Give Me Some Lovin'."
Give me some lovin' every day. Yeah.
It wasn't going to work. Malcolm called then AC/DC manager Michael Browning in protest, telling him of the rough start of the sessions, and he brought in an up-and-comer from Zambia named Robert Lange, of course otherwise known as Mutt Lange. At that point, Mutt had made a name for himself by producing the Boomtown Rats UK #1 hit Rat Trap.
It's the Rat Trap, and you've been caught.
So when they worked with Eddie Kramer before Mutt came in, it had been over 3 weeks, and they hadn't accomplished anything with him, with Kramer at the console. One story that emerged is that they actually tricked Kramer by telling him they were taking a day off so that he wouldn't come into the studio. But they snuck in and worked. And one day, without Eddie Kramer looking over the shoulder, they actually laid down 6 songs. They put it on tape. They sent it to Mutt Lange prior to his arrival, or to him working on the album. Now, as we go into this breakdown of this song, I want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear, the brand that I always wear. When you go to zenni.com to look at the glasses there, you shop according to the shape of your face. That's the way you can ensure that you always have a variety of really great and distinctive eyewear that will look good on you. So the sessions for Highway to Hell were moved to Roundhouse Studios in North London in the spring of 1979. In what would become a hallmark of their working relationship with Mutt Lange going forward, the band basically lived at the studio. They worked virtually around the clock to get the best out of their creative flow. Now, up to that point, they hadn't worked for more than 3 weeks on any record. With Highway to Hell, they worked like 15 hours a day around the clock with Mutt Lange's no-nonsense philosophy, which was embraced by the band, by the way. In an interview with Mojo Magazine, Malcolm Young said, and I quote, "Mutt liked the simplicity of a band. We were all minimalist. We felt it was the best way to be. He knew we were all dedicated, so we sort of got it. But he made sure the tracks were solid and he could hear if a snare just went off." End of quote. Lead guitarist Angus Young was elated at how meticulous Mutt was about getting the right sound, whether it was guitar or drums or vocals. He said that Bon was mighty impressed as well with how his voice was sounding at that moment. Now, it was a challenge for the band members at first, as Mutt was no holds barred. In fact, there were 2 incidents that opened the band's eyes to the way Mutt was. The first one was with Angus. One day, Mutt walked up to Angus while he was working on his guitar part, and Mutt said very directly, and I quote, "Sit here and I'll tell you what I want you to play." Angus was a bit surprised, but he sat next to Mutt, who pointed at the fretboard and said, "Here, hold that, now go into that." It was actually the exalted solo of Highway to Hell that I'm talking about here. The band was very impressed as the solo, of course, soared from there. Another time, Mutt was watching Bon record a vocal part, and he was struggling with the really challenging part of that song. And Mutt said to Bon, "There's more breath than voice coming out. Listen, you have to coordinate your breathing." Bon wasn't happy with the criticism, so he said something to the effect of, "If you're so good, you do it." And Mutt answered straight away. He just sat in his seat and sang the part effortlessly without standing up. He earned the respect of the band because Mutt never forced them, and he never asked them to do something that he couldn't do himself. That trust that was developed is why Highway to Hell and Back in Black were just almost flawless recordings, really. Mutt Lange was a trained singer. He showed Bon how to properly breathe, and it helped him become so much better as a singer. Mutt was part of the process. He recorded background vocals. He even had to stand on another side of the room of the studio because his voice was so powerful and distinct. In fact, that was one of the major parts that Mutt brought to the band's developing sound, those melodic backing vocals. So let's get into the title track, Highway to Hell, a song that has blown the minds of so many, including Eddie Van Halen and Joe Perry of Aerosmith. From the beginning, Atlantic Records was not happy about using the song as the title of the album. This was around the same time of the famous Satanic Panic, where parents groups and people in the media, they read into anything and create false narratives and incorrect notions around bands and their music. No different here, because as Malcolm has said on a few occasions, the song Highway to Hell was about being on the road. It wasn't about Satan. The grueling schedule of touring, Angus would say, and I quote, "Just because you call an album Highway to Hell, you get all kinds of grief. And all we've done is describe what it's like to be on the road for 4 years, like we'd been. A lot of it was bus and car touring with no real break. You crawl off the bus at 4 o'clock in the morning, and some journalist is doing a story, and he says, what would you call an AC/DC tour? Well, it was a highway to hell. It really was. When you're sleeping with the singer's socks 2 inches away from your nose, that's pretty close to hell." End of quote. The song actually came one night when they were in Miami. The band was virtually broke at the time. Angus and brother Malcolm were just jamming in a rehearsal studio. All of a sudden, Angus had this idea for a guitar intro. He started to play a riff that would become Highway to Hell. Malcolm would say about the riff, and I quote, "There were hundreds of riffs going down every single day, but this one we thought, that's good. It just stuck out like a dog's balls." End of quote. Directly after hearing the riff, like I said in the intro, Malcolm was so inspired, he jumped on the drum kit and he started banging out a beat. There happened to be a guy in the studio that was working with them who recorded it. I guess this guy took the demo cassette home that had it on it. He gave it to his kid to play with, who ended up unraveling the tape. I mean, can you even imagine? So Angus gave the messed up tape to Bon Scott, who apparently was really great at fixing broken cassettes, and he put it back together, ensuring that this great song wouldn't be lost forever. Wow. Bon Scott would put a vocal on Highway to Hell that only multiplied its impact. I mean, the words seemed to convey Bon's fierce independence and his life choices up to that point. Think about the lyrics, how he brashly sings, "Asking nothing, leave me be. Nobody's gonna slow me down, going down, party time. It was as if Bon was staring death down in this song. He wasn't willing to compromise, unfortunately. Now, Bon wrote the lyrics, and Angus and Malcolm were credited with the music. Apparently, the highway that inspired the title is Canning Highway. That connects the Perth-Kwinana freeway to its port, Fremantle, which was home to a lot of Bon Scott's favorite pubs and hotels, including the Raffles Hotel. Highway to Hell was chosen as the opening song, and of course, the title track. With Mutt Lange's influence, everything came together for one of AC/DC's greatest songs with the emergence of that double guitar sound. I'm on a highway to hell. With the towering backing vocals. It just electrified everyone involved. It was a precursor, definitely, to the over-the-top global domination that would follow with Back in Black. Highway to Hell really paved that way. Highway to Hell, the album, was released in midsummer of 1979. It was the band's first album to break into the top 100 album chart in America, settled at number 17. Became AC/DC's second biggest selling record in the US. Up to date, it sold 7 million copies. Now, speaking of Satanic Panic, the label, who was initially upset about the title of the album being Highway to Hell, They contradicted themselves. At the last minute, the label took an already released black and white glossy pic of the band, and they took it upon themselves to superimpose a tail and horns on Angus Young, making him look like the devil, Satan himself. It shocked everybody, including the band. Further rumors, of course, escalated from the pentacle that Bon Scott is wearing around his neck in the picture, although if you look closely, the pentacle is pointed upwards, which is supposed to protect whoever wears it from evil. It's exactly the same way that many have misinterpreted the so-called devil horns that originated with Ronnie James Dio. It's become the international symbol of heavy metal. Of course, there are many stories that have come from this symbol, about this symbol, this gesture, whatever you want to call it. But Ronnie's widow, Wendy Dio, has said, and I want to quote this exactly, a lot of people claim that it was theirs, and it's okay. It wasn't Ronnie's. It's an old Italian sign called Malocchio, the evil eye, as to ward off evil. His grandma, when he was about 5, used to walk down to town to give his grandpa lunch at the steel mill, and he'd see his grandma doing the sign. It was like, warding off evil, and he didn't think about it. It was just part of his heritage. End of quote. Highway to Hell has reached far and wide through pop culture since its release. It's become a pinnacle. It's been featured prominently in many films. School of Rock, I actually loved how they used it there. Also the Adam Sandler flick Little Nicky, as well as in the Final Destination series, Empire Records, The Longest Yard, Shoot 'Em Up, just to name a few. It's been covered too many times to mention in song. Billy Joel has made it a highlight of all of his shows for many years, where he takes a break and his roadie, nicknamed Chainsaw, takes over for an audience-galvanizing rendition of the classic song. I've seen him a ton of times live, and it just gets everybody going. I mean, looking back on the sessions for Highway to Hell with Mutt Lange at the helm, it changed everything for AC/DC. I mean, the Uber producer helped them recognize their incomparable abilities as creators and musicians. They conquered America, and it set up their path to their masterpiece. Although in all their glory and success, and that pivotal year, it would also prove to be the last few months of lead singer Bon Scott's life. Bon passed away in February of 1980. The tragedy would devastate the band, but they would come back with a vengeance. Highway to Hell is a powerful example of why Bon Scott was one of the greatest hard rock singers ever. I mean, his uncompromising independence and his Take No Prisoners vocal attack is a living exclamation mark to the end of an era in hard rock history, with Angus Young's earth-shattering riff on the same song being the preamble to a new era as AC/DC trudged on. Leave us a comment about this mind-blowing guitar riff and song. What do you think? Or what did you think the first time you experienced it? What are your memories of AC/DC and your thoughts on Bon Scott, one of the great singers? If you like our content, we do invite you to be a full-time part of POR by subscribing below. Check out our content on Patreon. Help us keep the music alive. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends.